Here are 8 extremely rich Korean people who live like they're completely broke, and some of these stories are going to genuinely mess with your head. We're talking about a billionaire who wore the same 2 pairs of shoes for 30 years and lived in a house built from leftover construction scraps, a chart-topping singer who earned hundreds of billions of won and has barely $20,000 left to his name, and a tycoon who handed his entire fortune to complete strangers, leaving absolutely nothing for his own son. Let's get into it. Number 8. SEO Jung Jin. Let's start with a rags-to-riches story so extreme it almost sounds made up. I want you to picture the lowest possible starting point, because that's exactly where Seo Jung Jin began, born into a family that scraped by selling coal briquettes, the cheap little blocks of fuel that heated the homes of Korea's poorest households. To claw his way through university, this man drove a taxi, and when he finally landed a solid corporate job at Daewoo Motors, the Asian financial crisis came along and wiped it out, leaving him unemployed and staring at nothing. Now here's where the story gets almost unbelievable, so stay with me. SEO decided to start a biotech company called Celltrion, betting everything on a then-obscure idea. And when the money completely ran dry and the whole thing was about to collapse, he did something most of us can barely imagine. He went to loan sharks for cash, and according to widely reported accounts, he literally pledged his own organs as collateral just to keep his dying company alive. Think about how desperate you'd have to be to sign away pieces of your own body on a bet that your business might one day work. Against every possible odd, that bet paid off in the most spectacular way imaginable, because Celltrion grew into a biopharmaceutical giant, pioneering affordable biosimilar versions of blockbuster drugs. And at one glorious point, it made Seo Jung Jin the single richest person in all of South Korea, with a fortune that has hovered around $8 billion. And the beautiful part is that the coal briquette kid never developed a taste for flash, running his empire on a strict, famously lean, zero-debt philosophy and keeping a remarkably low profile about his personal spending. But my favorite thing about him is a single line he once delivered, because when people expected him to cling to power forever the way most Korean tycoons do, he flatly announced he'd step aside, saying that staying on past his time would just turn the company into a personal kingdom. "The chairman is a title," he said, "not a king." Coming from a man who pledged his organs to build the thing, that's a stunning amount of humility. Now Seo fought his way up from absolutely nothing, and our next man walked an eerily similar path, growing up so poor that his entire family shared a single room. Number 7. Kim Byung-soo. Number 7 is a man whose app is almost certainly on your phone if you live in Korea, because Kim Byung-soo, who goes by Brian Kim, is the founder of Kakao, the messaging platform installed on a jaw-dropping 90% of the country's smartphones. But before he was a tech god, he was just a poor kid from one of Seoul's roughest neighborhoods, and I really want you to sit with the details here because they're humbling. He grew up as one of 5 children, and at one point 8 members of his family were crammed into a single one-bedroom apartment, raised largely by his grandmother while his parents, a pen factory worker and a hotel maid, worked themselves to the bone. He was so broke putting himself through the prestigious Seoul National University that he tutored other students for cash and, by his own account, regularly skipped meals just to save a little money. Just imagine being that hungry, in every sense of the word, and then imagine where he ended up. When he launched Kakao Talk in 2010 and smartphones exploded across Korea, his creation took over the entire country, and at his peak, Kim Byung-soo was briefly the wealthiest person in all of South Korea, sitting on a fortune that soared past $10 billion. So what does a man who once skipped meals do when he suddenly has more money than he could ever spend? Well, in 2021, he did something almost unheard of among Korea's business elite, publicly signing the Giving Pledge alongside his wife and vowing to give away more than half of his entire fortune to solve society's biggest problems. We're talking a commitment worth billions of dollars from a guy who grew up sharing one room with 7 other people. And rather than just cutting checks, he poured serious money into a foundation aimed at funding research into future technology and artificial intelligence, essentially trying to hand the next generation the kind of opportunities he never had. For all his wealth, he's remained strikingly low-key, more interested in strategy and even video games than in flaunting a lavish lifestyle. Now Kim gave away half of his fortune, which is remarkable enough. But our next person took the whole idea of giving to an almost reckless extreme. And here's the twist. He isn't a tech founder or a tycoon at all. Speaking of a mind more interested in the next move than the next trophy, there's a program someone on our team has been curious about called the Billionaire Brain Wave. It's a simple 7-minute audio built around theta brainwave research, the deep focused brain state linked to where big creative ideas come from. You put on headphones once a day, usually with your morning coffee, and that's the whole routine. It's a one-time $39, it comes with bonus guides on money habits and investing basics, and there's a 90-day money-back guarantee. So testing it costs you nothing if it's not for you. If you're watching on your TV, pause and scan the QR code on screen with your phone camera, or tap the first link in the description. Now, back to the countdown and the famous voice sitting at number 6. Number 6. Kim Jong-un. Number 6 is going to completely break the pattern because he isn't a businessman. He's one of the most beloved singers in Korean history, and his story might be the most stunning one on this entire list. Kim Jong-un dominated the Korean music scene for decades, earning what he estimates was hundreds of billions of won through massive record sales and something like 50 commercial deals during his peak. By any normal logic, a star like that should be sitting in a mansion surrounded by luxury cars. So, are you ready for what he actually has to show for all of it? In a candid interview in early 2026, Kim Jong-un revealed that his total assets amount to a housing deposit worth about $22,000 and roughly $1,500 sitting in his bank account. That's it. That is the entire net worth of a man who earned a fortune most people can't even fathom. And the reason is beautifully simple because he gave almost all of it away. He's donated so much over the years, well over 20 billion won and counting, that he earned the national nickname the Donation Angel. And he personally foots the bill for the free concerts he loves to put on. Now here's what I find so refreshing about his mindset, because he's the first to admit he doesn't see this as some noble sacrifice. He genuinely enjoys nice things when he wants them, but his rule is that he simply gives away whatever is left over after his own modest needs are met, because keeping it all just doesn't sit right with him. Having survived genuine poverty and even homelessness earlier in his life, he says he feels no anxiety whatsoever about his empty bank account. In fact, when someone pointed out how uncomfortable his lifestyle might look to others, he brushed it off entirely, saying he's always just chosen the path that makes him happy, and that even in old age he isn't afraid of being poor. He even joked that soon he'll get to ride the subway for free anyway. His stated lifetime goal is to eventually give away a truly staggering sum, and he summed up his whole philosophy in one line that stuck with me. "I'm not confident I'll be successful, but I am confident I'll be happy." Now, Kim Jong-un gave until he had almost nothing, and our next man proves that even people who sell their companies for billions can stay grounded in exactly where they came from. Number 5. Kim Bong-jin. Number 5 is Kim Bong-jin, the founder of Badal Minjok, better known as Baemin, the food delivery app that utterly transformed the way Korea eats. But long before he was a startup hero, he was a kid from a genuinely humble background, and he's never once tried to hide it. In his own words describing his origins, he spoke openly about his modest beginnings, growing up on a small island, the kind of place about as far from the glittering soul startup scene as you can possibly get. And his road to success was anything but smooth because before Baemin ever took off, Kim actually endured a string of failed businesses, the kind of repeated gut punches that make most people quit and go get a safe job. But he kept swinging, and when he finally launched Baemin in 2010, it became an absolute cultural phenomenon, dominating Korean food delivery so completely that in 2019, he sold the company to the German giant Delivery Hero in a deal valued at around $4 billion. Overnight, the island kid who'd failed over and over was a billionaire. So what did he do with that life-changing windfall? In early 2021, Kim Bong-jin and his wife became, by many accounts, the very first Koreans ever to sign the famous Giving Pledge, publicly committing to donate more than half of their entire wealth to good causes. Think about the mindset shift that requires, going from a small island with nothing, through years of failure, to suddenly being rich enough to give away billions, and then actually choosing to do it. What I appreciate is that he explicitly set himself apart from Korea's traditional chaebol heirs, the people who simply inherit their fortunes, power, and connections without ever building anything themselves. Kim represents a completely different breed, the self-made founder who earned every bit of it and feels a real responsibility to give it back. Even after leaving Bayman, he stayed a restless creative, launching quirky new little ventures rather than just retiring onto a yacht. Now Kim made a very loud, very public promise to give, but our next billionaire is the polar opposite, a man so private that most people wouldn't recognize his face if he walked right past them. Number 4. Kwon Hyuk-bin. Number 4 is a fascinating case study in staying invisible, because Kwon Hyuk-bin is one of the richest men in South Korea, and yet he is famously, almost aggressively reclusive, rarely giving interviews or making public appearances at all. If flashy billionaires are constantly chasing the spotlight, Kwon is the guy quietly slipping out the back door. And honestly, given the size of his fortune, it's remarkable how little you ever hear about him. His journey wasn't a straight shot to the top either. Raised in modest circumstances, Kwon actually founded an educational software company first, and it flopped completely. He then made a decision that must have looked insane to everyone around him, turning down a coveted job at Samsung to chase his real dream of making video games. That gamble led him to found Smilegate in 2002, and after teaming up with the Chinese giant Tencent, his company released a first-person shooter called Crossfire that became, at its height, the single most played game of its kind on the entire planet, raking in billions and pushing his net worth up as high as nearly $7 billion. Here's a detail that tells you everything about how differently he operates, because after 2 decades of massive success, Kwon has never taken his company public, and he still personally owns 100% of it, quietly cautious about letting outside money in. He built a global empire entirely on his own terms, without ever ringing the opening bell or courting Wall Street. But the part I really admire is where he points all that quiet wealth, because Kwon runs multiple foundations dedicated to lifting up young people, building schools in China and Vietnam to teach kids IT skills, and funding one of Korea's largest private incubators to support young entrepreneurs chasing their own dreams. And here's the kicker that sums him up perfectly. Because when it comes to the startups, his foundation helps. He refuses to take any profit share, explaining simply that he sees it as his responsibility to repay the favor society once offered him. Now Kwon quietly gives to the next generation, and our next man gives away something that most wealthy people cling to more tightly than anything else. Number 3. Park Hyun-joo. Number 3 is Park Hyun-joo, a man often called the father of South Korea's entire mutual fund industry. And his story is a masterclass in building something from pure, self-made grit. This wasn't a Chaebol heir handed a family empire. Park grew up in a rural corner of southern Korea, surrounded by mountains and rivers, and when he was just entering high school, his father suddenly passed away, a devastating loss that he says pushed him to bury himself in books about great leaders just to cope with the grief. He clawed his way up through the securities world, and then in 1997, right as the Asian financial crisis was flattening the Korean economy, he made a boldly contrarian move, founding Mirai Asset and launching the country's very first mutual fund. It sold out within hours. From that single spark, he built Mirai Asset into a sprawling global financial powerhouse, one of the largest independent financial groups in all of Korea. A rise so impressive that Harvard Business School turned it into a case study. Now, plenty of people get rich in finance, but here's what sets Park apart and lands him on this list. For well over a decade now, this man has been donating every single one of his personal dividend income to his own charitable foundation. Just think about that for a second. Because dividends are the sweetest, most passive money a wealthy shareholder can receive, the reward you get simply for owning the stock, and most tycoons guard that income fiercely. Park just gives all of it away, year after year, without fail. And that money does real, tangible good, because his foundation has put nearly 7,000 students from disadvantaged families through top universities across dozens of countries, quietly funding scholarships that change entire life trajectories. He built his own fortune from a rural childhood marked by loss, and now he spends it opening doors for kids who remind him of his younger self. Now Park gives away his dividends, which is genuinely rare. But our next man is the stuff of legend, a titan of industry who somehow managed to build one of the world's biggest companies while personally living like he was still a broke laborer. Number 2. Chung Ju-young. Number 2 is an absolute giant of Korean history, the late Chung Ju-young, the founder of the Hyundai Group. And if you want the definition of living below your means, this is it. Chung was born the son of a dirt-poor rice farmer, in a straw-roofed house where the family often went to bed hungry, and shoes were considered a genuine luxury. As a young laborer, he was so committed to saving money that he'd walk an hour and a half to work just to avoid paying a few cents for transport, and he'd nail the soles onto his shoes to keep them from wearing out. He even saved half of his salary, which at the time was literally paid to him in sacks of rice. Now, most people who crawl out of that kind of poverty and become fabulously wealthy immediately start spending to erase the memory of it. Chung did the exact opposite, and this is the part that gives me chills. Even after Hyundai grew into a colossal empire, spanning cars, ships, and construction, making him one of the richest men in the entire country with billions to his name, he never let go of that frugality. There are 2 pairs of shoes displayed in the Hyundai Company Museum that this multi-billionaire reportedly wore for 30 years, simply getting them repaired again and again instead of buying new ones. And it goes further because he reportedly lived in a modest home partly built from leftover construction materials from his own company, waking up at 4 in the morning every single day and famously demanding that his employees use both sides of every sheet of paper to avoid waste. When newspapers reported that he had the highest income in the country, he said it actually made him feel guilty, insisting that his lifestyle was hardly any different from that of a typical middle-class Hyundai employee. Can you imagine having the power to buy literally anything on earth and choosing instead to patch up the same shoes for 3 decades? That wasn't stinginess. It was a deep, unshakable philosophy about the value of a single one, forged in a childhood of hunger. He poured his real energy not into possessions but into building his nation, and later, into a foundation providing medical care and scholarships. Now Chung lived like a humble worker his whole life. But our number 1 took this entire idea to its ultimate, almost unimaginable conclusion, giving away everything he had and leaving his own family with next to nothing. Number 1. Il-han Nu. Number 1 is a man who is nothing short of a national hero in Korea, the late Dr. Il-han Nu. And by the time you hear how his story ends, I think you'll understand exactly why. Born in 1895 and sent alone to America as a 9-year-old boy, Nu actually built a small fortune in the United States, selling food products before making a choice most rich men would never dream of. He gave up that comfortable American success and returned to a Korea suffering under colonial rule, founding the pharmaceutical company Yuhan in 1926 for one simple reason, because he believed only a healthy people could ever reclaim their freedom. Yuhan grew into one of Korea's oldest and most respected companies, but Nu ran it in a way that was radical then and is still rare today. He treated his workers extraordinarily well, building them dormitories and childcare, and he flatly rejected the entire chaebol playbook of handing the company down to his own bloodline. He famously insisted that family influence guarantees a company neither growth nor survival, and so he chose a successor who wasn't related to him at all, separating ownership from management decades before anyone else in Korea thought to do it. But it's his final act that cements him as a legend, and I need you to really absorb this. When Il-han Nu passed away in 1971, his will was so extraordinary that a newspaper printed it as a special editorial for the whole nation to read. To his granddaughter, he left just $10,000, and only to cover her college tuition. To his daughter, he left a small plot of land, on the condition that she keep it as a park for students. And his entire remaining fortune, all of his company shares, he donated completely to a public foundation for education and social welfare. So what did he leave his own grown son, the heir most tycoons spend their lives enriching? He left him a single sentence, and it's one of the most famous lines in Korean business history. "My son," he wrote, "you have graduated from college, so live on your own from now on." That's it, nothing else. A man who built an empire looked at his own child and essentially said, "I've given you an education, now go make your own way, and everything I own belongs to society." He genuinely believed that the most valuable thing a person can leave behind isn't wealth or fame at all, but something lasting for the people who come after them. And that is what it truly looks like to be rich and to live and die like you owe everything to the world around you. And those were 8 extremely rich Korean people who live like they are poor. What gets me, looking back at all of them, is that not one of these fortunes came with a sense of entitlement. Because whether it was a Cole Briquette kid pledging his organs, a singer down to his last few dollars, or a legend patching the same shoes for 30 years, every single one of them seemed to understand that money was a tool, not a trophy. They had every excuse in the world to live large, and they quietly chose not to. So I'm genuinely curious, which of these stories hit you the hardest? Whether it was Chung Ju-young's worn-out shoes or Ilhan Nu leaving his son nothing but a lesson. Drop it down in the comments, give this a like if any of these people surprised you, and stay tuned with Global Status, because there's always another story worth telling.